Hey there. I wasn't planning on doing this, but a conversation came up, and I haven't shared this story, and it's a really important story for buyers. And buyers need to know what happens when you go to the listing agent to make an offer. Now, I know buyers are out there, there's tons of buyers out there, and they're afraid to connect and be with one real estate agent because fairly in their eyes, a lot of real estate agents can't get the job done. I know that. I work in the industry. I've been in this industry for 23 years. It's a fair statement, but we are not all the same. We don't all handle transactions the same. We are, for the most part, 1099 business owners. So we create our own business the way that we see fit. And some real estate agents see that as very part-time or very sporadic, or, oh, somebody needs me, so now I'm going to jump in and I'm going to be in the market for, the next couple months. But those situations can create havoc because if an agent isn't in the market actively all the time, they don't actually know what's been going on in the market for the past week, 2 months, 6 months, year, and it creates an issue for their buyer clients. Or if an agent, I've had agents who pay for leads on Zillow and who, if I have a listing, they call me and they say, hey, because I always offer, I say, if you want to send your buyer and you can't make it, just send your buyer. I can't tell you how many agents said, oh, will you show my buyer this property? And I go to show the buyer the property and they're like, I never met my agent. Like, you never met your agent? They're like, no, we just conversed, but I don't even want to work with them because they're not helping me. Buyer agency is a really good thing, and it's a really challenging conversation to have with a lot of people for those reasons. Like, buyer agents aren't always great. You need somebody who's full-time in the market. But the reason why you need a really good buyer agent and do your homework and ask a lot of questions of your buyer agent before hiring them. And just know you don't have to hire a buyer agent for a year. You can hire a buyer agent to for a day for specific properties. The list is endless on how you can work with somebody as a buyer agent. And it's a good way to test out buyer agents. So, like, if you called me and you're like, there's 3 properties I really want to see. I don't want to, have a long-term contract with you. I just want to see these 3 properties. I can say yes or no. I don't have to say yes, but I often do. I'm like, why not? Show you 3 properties. We'll talk about your goals. I'll help you through these properties I'll be representing you on. And we can talk about whether we want to work further or not. It doesn't harm you and it actually can save you. And here's an example of a situation when I had a listing. And here's what happens when you go directly to the listing agent and you bypass having your own buyer agent. I'll preface this by saying most, if not all, real estate purchases are there's an emotional component to them, right? Buyer falls in love with a house, they want to buy it. Right there, the emotions start. And when that happens, and a listing agent knows you want that property more than anything, you have now lost your negotiation power as representing yourself. It happens that quickly. It can happen the minute you walk in the door and they see your face, get excited. And so now they know how much you love the property. Even if you don't talk about it, like if you're there more than 10 minutes, if you're lingering, if you're asking questions and you're like, oh, no, no, we're just looking, there are different tells of when a buyer wants to buy a property. And if you're in this business long enough and you work in it full time, you can see this as a listing agent. I can tell. I can tell. I can read people. I can tell. So that gives me a foothold in my negotiation as a listing agent with a buyer who's unrepresented. And the conversation can go something like this. I love this property. We're going to make an offer, but just tell the seller we're going to offer, let's say 450, and the price on the property is 550. Like, we don't feel like it's worth 550. We don't really want to spend that much money. Fine, I can write that up. Or I can text my seller right now and I can see if it's worth writing up an offer. And I text my seller and I say, there's buyers here. Your home's been on the market for a while. They're offering 450. What do you want me to say? Now, also, I can text them and say, I know they love this property and I know they can afford 550. Tell me no. Seller responds, I read the text. Seller says no to 450. How about 475? Let me do it again. Same thing. 475. Well, we're just gonna think about it. We're gonna go, we're gonna think about it. And they kind of head to the door, the buyers, and now they turn around and they're like, do you think the buyer would sell it at 500? I mean, the seller would sell it at 500. Again, let me text the seller and um, let me see if they'd be interested in that. Text the seller, same thing. And now my conversation with the buyer would have had a little more content. I would have asked a few more questions. What are you looking for? How long have you been looking? How does this, fit your needs? So I would have a little more understanding of where they're coming from and how likely they are to spend 550 on this property. And if you're good at this as a listing agent, you can really benefit your sellers. You don't want to push so much that you lose qualified buyers or cash buyers who are guaranteeing you proof of funds, but you don't want to give it away because you represent the seller. And these buyers have no agent. So this can go back and forth. Okay, we're going to go. And they're still lingering around the house and they go outside and they're walking around and I can see them whispering. And now, like, I know for a fact that they're going to come close to 550. I just know it. I can tell. And they come back in and they're like, how about 520? We'll give them 520 and that's it. I'm like, okay, let me check. And then, so I text my seller and I say, they're at 520. Here's what I want you to ask me about them. And I give them some specifics so that when I read their text back, I'm reading what the seller is asking them, that I told the seller to ask them. Now, this is not illegal. I work for the seller. These buyers are telling me all this information. I'm not doing anything illegal. I am working for my client. I protect my client's best interest. I don't work for the buyer. I can write up the contract. So when we get into a number that is closer or that they might, I know that's their top that they're going to offer, I can offer to write up the contract and submit it, still saying, I don't know what the seller's going to say, but I can write up the offer for you. Or I can say, the seller's probably not going to come far off their price. They've already had a price reduction and this is a really good price. And if you know the market, you've been out there, you know that this is a good price. They might say, yeah, but we don't want to spend all our money. We have to do some repairs. Da, 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 da. Okay. I'll write up the offer for 520. So now I write the offer up for 520. They sign it. I submit it to my seller. And now we negotiate from there. Here's my point with that. Whether they came back at 520 or 550, regardless of where they started, if I put my other hat on and I was not representing the seller in this scenario, and I was representing these buyers, and we walked into this property and they said, we love it. We only want to offer 450. We would probably have a conversation because if the property has more value, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. If you go too low, I might have said, why don't we start at 460, 480, whatever I felt the property was valued at, and I would know the listing agent. So a lot of my negotiation when I work for a buyer is I read the listing agent. I see what they're about. I know their history if they're local agents. I know how they work. I might know the property. I might know more than the average person. There's a lot of things that go in representing a buyer. So maybe we make an offer at 460, they say no. All right, we go back at 480. Now this is in writing. I am a buyer agent writing up these offers, submitting them. So I have a much better chance as a buyer agent to get my buyers a lower price than they're ever going to get by going directly to the listing agent. Because what happens is when a seller sees an offer, and maybe it's not their first offer, maybe they've had other offers, or maybe the property has been sitting and they haven't had other offers for a while. As a buyer agent, I get all this information to be able to negotiate strongly on the price that we submit. I can get my buyers and I can get my fee covered if I'm paying a fee. I mean, if the buyers are paying a fee to me, if the seller's not covering any part of the buyer agency fee, I can get that covered and still get my buyers a better deal than they would have got on their own. This is lost on so many people. Like, buyers just don't get this. And I get it. Like, I can tell you till I'm blue in the face, but I wanted to give you more of a scenario, and I hope this is a helpful one. I know as a listing agent, I know when buyers come to me what my role is and how to protect my seller's best interest. When I work for buyers, game on. Like, we are going for the lowest possible price to offer in the beginning to get the sellers to say yes. And then we'll see if anything comes up at inspection or if there's anything else to negotiate, we will. But unless it's a brand new property that I feel like is really priced and it's going to be very competitive, I always try to be first in the door. Sometimes the pictures aren't up. You try to be first in the door. Like, as a buyer agent, there are so many different strategies that I can use to try to get you the best price possible in the shortest amount of time so that we can lock that down. We can lock you into that contract so that you can close at a much better price than you ever would have got on your own. It's what I do. That's my role as a buyer agent. So if you're thinking you don't want to be trapped or stuck with a buyer agent, that might not do a good job for you. That's fair. There's a lot of them who aren't great negotiators, and about 85% of the agents with a real estate license in the state of New Hampshire do not use it, or they do one transaction a year or less. Sometimes an agent hasn't had transactions in a couple of years. I can look into the history and I can tell you. Like, when I see my history, when I was running other businesses and I was accumulating like my own properties and stuff, I had um, less property contracts transactions in MLS, but I always stayed fresh in the market. So I always knew my market. I always was in there looking at what was going on. I'm full time in this market and I have been for several years. So I know my market. I know the people, I know the agents, I know the strategy to get the best deal, and I know the questions to ask. And that is gold to you as a buyer because you can get a much better price when you have an agent who is protecting your best interest in your pocket rather than going directly to the seller. Going directly to the seller will never get you the best price. And here's another fact that goes into play with that. When all the rules got changed, all the rules, when the rules got changed last year about how a listing, uh, how a seller would pay the listing agent and the buyer agent. Okay, so they broke it down. So before it used to be one fee, and from there there'd be a percentage that would go to the buyer agent's company, part to the listing agent company, part to the buyer agent company. Wasn't always 50-50. And then it just depended on how much they were going to get from their company because the company takes a cut. So the fees always split four ways when there's a buyer and listing agent, buyer agent and listing agent. So when that changed last July, there's a place where the seller can say, okay, I'm going to pay X to my listing agent and then X to my listing agent if a buyer comes unrepresented. That means that the buyer is now coming into the contract, and the listing agent, if the buyer is unrepresented, the listing agent is actually making more money by the buyer coming unrepresented and is still negotiating against the buyer. So both the seller and the listing agent are making more money off this transaction. And the buyer is losing because the buyer has no representation. It's important that you know this. This is why I'm putting it in a video. And that's why I look the way I do today, because I wasn't planning on doing a video. But as I was changing up some things on my website, I'm like, you know what? People really need to know this stuff. Buyers really need to know this. So you have to just process that as a buyer. Like you have to really look at the big picture. And if you have more questions, you can call me. We can talk through it. You don't need to hire me. I would be happy to answer the questions for you and just get you comfortable with what really goes on in a transaction on the buy side and the sell side. So there's lots we can cover. I do plan on doing some more videos for um, consumers. I feel like the people don't know a lot of this. And you haven't. And why would you? You don't know what goes on behind the scenes. You're not in the industry, but it affects you. This is your money. Like this isn't anybody else's money that you're spending. This is your money that you're spending buying this property. It's super important that you get right on this or you're going to lose. And it can be $2,000, it can be $20,000, it can be $50,000 or more. It can be $250,000 depending on the price of the home. Like you don't have protection, right? It's like if you get in an accident, who's going to make out, right? You're going to lose. If you get in an accident, you don't have insurance, you're going to pay a lot more. If you're in a lawsuit and you don't have a lawyer and the other side has a lawyer, you're going to lose a lot more because you're not represented. In real estate, it's it's important to have representation. You need somebody who knows the ins and outs of the industry, the market, the property, how to work through the details, negotiate on your behalf. Like you need that. And if you think you don't, that's okay. It doesn't really matter the price of the property. I could give you this scenario across the board, from low price to high price properties. And sometimes the smartest people in many other areas, doctors, lawyers, uh, people who are of high standard, people who are very wealthy, right? This isn't their area of expertise. And they go, well, I can negotiate here in my business, so I'm good at that, so I can do this. It's not the same business. And once you get to the point where you're negotiating an emotional transaction, and real estate becomes an emotional transaction. If you're the husband, you're the negotiator, and your wife falls in love with a property, what are you going to do? Tell her, no, we couldn't get it for the right price, so we're going to walk away. How often do I see that? It's rare. Usually the buyers cave because they really want the property. Okay, so do yourself a favor, get a good buyer agent on your team, and just vet buyer agents. Don't just pick up the first one at an open house that you go to because they seem nice. Nice is great. I can be very nice. I can also negotiate like there's nobody else's business. Like that is my strong suit. You need to know what you're working with. You need to know who's representing you. Super important, especially if you don't want to overpay for something. My name is Michelle Pallas. I'm in the Lakes region. I'm with the Lakes Region Group at eXp Realty. I would love to have a conversation with you. If you want me to represent you, I would be happy to represent you. Another thing, I don't represent every single buyer that I talk to. There are some buyers who we're not going to work good together, and I can just tell. And I'm not going to be somebody's puppet, and I'm not going to be pushed and played with, and I'm not going to be screwed around with. And I've had those people that I say no to. Like I will work with people who want a good deal, who want me to represent them, but I also do it with integrity. So I I don't play in those dark gray areas, or I don't do things that are not legal. I've had people offer me money outside of a transaction to represent them. No, I'm not going to lose my license for you. And that's just not how I do business. So just know if you want good representation or if you want some questions answered, I can help you at least get started with that. And if you want to go further, we can go further. Michelle Pallas, I'm here for you.